Hello and welcome back to Massalia Tales. On the last episode we saw Eusebios go and retake Tolosa from the Pictones clan. We moved up and they put out a small army to defend against us. However, we used our light forces who were left over from previous battles to defeat them without taking any more casualties to our more valuable units, taking the town. But Eusebios very quickly had to move back to Massalia because multiple enemy armies were descending upon it. We've got the Pictones, the Celtic Confederation and the Raeti all coming towards the city at once. I knew I had to defeat one of these armies before all three attacked the city, which would be a very dangerous situation. I attacked the one belonging to the Celtic Confederation, who had fortified themselves north of the city. I've just begun besieging that fort, and in a lucky twist we've defeated their general right off the bat, beating the enemy, and now low on morale, it's time to continue our assault. The Confederation army, unlike many previously seen warbands, were as apt in defense as in attack. As Eusebios approached, they fortified their position and arranged their men in a tight formation, described as being comparable to a Greek hoplite phalanx. What they didn't factor in was that Eusebios knew the weakness of such open fortifications. Even in the middle of winter, he was able to launch a successful fire attack on the barbarian encampment, destroying palisades and killing the warlord in command. With his enemy now in disarray, the rising Greek general ordered his men to attack what remained of the icy fortress. So Eusebios is now advancing on the enemy fortifications, pushing in his heavy infantry to begin engaging the enemy properly. We've just about finished destroying the enemy's palisade walls as much as we need to. We've opened up gaps on both flanks, which has also killed some of the enemy inside, meaning we can flank around with some of our faster, lighter forces once the fighting starts. The whole front of the enemy fort is completely exposed. The plan is to move heavy infantry up to start tapping at the enemy's shield at the very least, just starting an engagement along the front line that won't necessarily be killing either side, but will distract the enemy and allow me to get inside the fortress using those gaps I've opened up in either side of the fortification walls and then wreak havoc once I'm in there. So here come the heavy infantry, the hoplites, slowly marching up to do battle with the enemy. The enemy mostly just defended the edge of their fortification. Some of them did charge out at the last minute to take the fight just outside the fort, which is good for me because the enemy do receive a morale bonus whilst fighting inside the fort. They even charged their cavalry into my hoplite phalanx. Very kind of them. Just going to throw those cavalry away. Their missile troops are the ones who do the most damage against me here, but they're also now very exposed. So once I get inside, I'll be able to take them out quite rapidly. Here's Eusebios himself leading his guards. He even has a clear passage in. I was planning to try and get him to outflank these guys right in front of him, but actually the enemy very quickly widened their line and kept Eusebios locked down. So the main part of the plan is to move up these light forces, Gallic levies and swordsmen to start attacking the open flanks of the enemy fortification. You can see the vast majority of the enemy army has been pulled into this fight at the front, which is exactly what I wanted. I want to distract as many of them as possible. Eusebios himself, you can see in the middle here, is now fighting one of the enemy's naked swordsmen. These naked swordsmen are classed as light melee infantry, which means they'll do almost no damage against the very heavy units commanded by Eusebios, so I was willing to let him fight on. Even though there was a small risk of him being defeated, he should be fine. I've moved up my own javelins too to throw into the huge horde of enemy troops who are just in front of them, all bunched together. Many of the enemies are fighting in a hoplite phalanx as well, so they're very nicely packed together, ready to be hit by missiles. You can see I'm trying to use a pike phalanx here, but it's not working. They're not turning to face the enemy. I was aware that they weren't actually pointing in the right direction, but they just stopped obeying orders at this point. I think possibly being so close to the wall just behind them means their formation is a bit messed up. Still, they're doing damage, and the guys who are forced to fight with their swords are very skilled and are actually surviving very well. So that was going much better than I thought it would. Here at the eastern breach of the camp wall, I'm moving in some hoplites who I decided aren't really needed in the main fight on the southern breach, so they're going to come in and fight with the enemy's slingers who decided to rush into melee. Those slingers, of course, are going to get themselves rapidly killed, which is excellent. They're no longer going to be firing at my men, which is going to save a good number of them. On the other side, my swordsmen are coming in, but there's a few disparate men who are holding them off, these heavy spearmen. I'm trying to get my guys to just ignore them and walk past them, and the enemy spearmen decide to run off in the end anyway, so it's all good. We're also starting to decapture the enemy camp, which will remove their morale bonus, which is excellent. Some of my hoplites have started attacking the enemy's main blob in the back, which is also excellent. That will start giving them a morale shock. and they're not going to be enjoyed being crushed against from both sides by heavy spearmen who will actually be able to inflict a good number of casualties upon them, especially some of the medium forces amongst the enemy's ranks. Eusebios is now showing his manliness by pretty much just fighting all of these naked guys at once. He's come out in front of the phalanx to show his men how it's done, battling hard against these naked swordsmen. You can even see he's rushing even deeper into the enemy formation, cutting one guy down, but now he's completely surrounded. But Eusebios isn't the sort of guy to be taken down by a 10-on-1 fight. He can hold off these guys just fine. He's eventually going to fight his way back to the formation. I have no idea how he survived that. I guess he is just a true man. Those naked swordsmen couldn't kill him, even with the odds stacked in their favour 10-1. Eusebios truly is a son of Zeus. Now at this point, some of the enemy units started to rout and shatter. These cavalry shattered at the speed of light, racing out of the fortress at an unheard of speed. I have no idea how they managed to inspire their horses to move that quickly, perhaps truly in fear of the Greek forces now pushing into the fort. These medium swordsmen who are currently holding off my hoplites aren't going to last too long. Medium swordsmen are actually very weak against heavy spearmen because their attack stats are too low to be able to best a hoplite phalanx. So we eventually break through them and pretty much take control of the whole fort, meaning that right across the back line of the enemy's main blob we can start engaging them, causing morale shocks to pretty much all of their units. Here you can see I'm attacking those naked swordsmen with a few men from behind. I'm also hitting them with javelins because, being naked, they're especially weak against missile fire, so I decided to deplete their numbers with a few jabs. Eusebios has stopped fighting one-on-one against these guys. I don't know where he's gone. I think he's probably gone to stand somewhere at the back of the hoplite phalanx, which is what the officer is supposed to do. But obviously he survived. Excellent news. Now you can see as I rush forces in to attack the enemy's main force from behind, they start to chain rout, and they try and chain rout out of the fortress through the forces that were engaging them from the front. A terrible decision because they're now going to be slaughtered as they attempt to leave. We've got them pretty much surrounded, so I guess there was no particularly good direction to rout in. The whole camp is covered in bodies, but most of the bodies that are still moving happen to be allied to Massalia. Excellent news. There are still lots of disparate enemy forces hanging around, like these odd cavalrymen, odd spearmen, even a couple of fairly doomed skirmishers, but overall this camp is ours, the day is ours. The remaining enemy forces are fighting on, but aren't going to be fighting for long. They're too tired out to actually escape from this complete encirclement, so the vast majority of them are going to die in the remaining minute of the battle as I cut them down. Their phalanx here will do better. Their tight formations seem to prevent my men from getting in there to attack them, so many of those guys actually weren't being killed, and in the end I decided to let them go, quit the battle. Still, it's a heroic victory for Eusebius' forces. We attacked an army that was more powerful than us and was fortified, but we've come out with a huge victory, almost no casualties, and the entire enemy army defeated. Exactly what we need.
As the enemy shuffled up, he pushed to the front of the phalanx, wrestling past me and ordering us not to hold him back. He drew his blade and started frantically slashing at the enemy, quickly getting out of our reach and disappearing into the ranks. His life was our responsibility, orders or no orders, so we tried to break through to him, but we could get the enemy to budge. I have no idea what divine power allowed him to wade so deep, but much to our relief, he appeared a short while later, hacking his way back to the line, deflecting blows from all angles, and taking more heads on the way. In the end, he had not a scratch on him. I'd never seen anything like it. I don't know if he's a descendant of the gods, or whether he just really hates the enemy.
So here are the battle results. A heroic victory, about 300 men lost for nearly 3,000 enemies killed. You can see from the panel on the left that Eusebius' army is in perfectly good health. The enemy's isn't. We've pretty much crushed the threat from the Confederation. That isn't enough to end the threat to Massalia. Still two more stacks to work through, but it's a good start. The question now was, should I move back to Massalia? Should I go and attack another army, or should I chase down the survivors of the Confederation? Chasing down the survivors was the lowest priority for me. I decided to do it anyway, just because I thought I'd have enough movement points to move back to the city afterwards, meaning I'd still be perfectly safe, and stop these guys from raiding, which would be very inconvenient. That would destroy my economy at this stage because my income is so low. We win a decisive victory in order to resolve losing 100 men and killing all of the survivors, but unfortunately Eusebios doesn't have enough movement points to make it back. He can make it back within the zone of control of the city, so if the city is attacked, he'll still take part in the battle, but not from the inside, which is a little bit less convenient. He'll also regenerate troops slower because he's not inside the city. If I was in there, I'd be back at full strength by next turn, but there's nothing I can do about it now. I wondered whether I could get Gelon to attack the Pictones army and pull Eusebios into a battle and fight them like that, but Eusebios was just too far away, so it couldn't happen. Instead, I decided that Gelon could go into the city to regenerate some troops for himself and protect himself from agent actions, and command the city garrison if the settlement was to come under attack. Now I wanted to see what was happening north of Massalia. You'll remember the Celt-Iberian Confederation have conquered Nemesis from the Arverni, and now they're moving even further north, attacking the Gallic Confederation, the former Arverni lands. And because they're relatively friendly to us, this means the situation is actually quite good. Now the Celtic Confederation wouldn't go to peace with me after defeating them. I thought I'd just show you that as yet another example of the AI refusing any kind of peaceable diplomacy. Very unfortunate. Moving on, the Raeti sabotage Eusebios and then besiege Massalia, but they don't attack critically. Very interesting. So with Massalia besieged, we're now in a bit of trouble. We need to reverse the situation as soon as possible, but Eusebios has no movement points because his provisions have been poisoned. He's also lost some troops. This means that if the Pictones had actually besieged the city and then the Raeti had attacked with them, they probably would have been able to take it because Eusebios couldn't have gotten involved in the battle. Interesting, a lucky break for Massalia. But still, we are a little bit unlucky because we can't do anything about it. Eusebios can't move. The city garrison isn't powerful enough to take both stacks sallying from the city, so there's literally nothing I can do about this situation. I just have to let them besiege me and see what happens. Perhaps in the next turn, the Pictones will come into attack and then we'll be in real trouble. Because this was really annoying, I wanted to take revenge on this enemy agent. Unfortunately, he's pretty high level, the same as my noblewoman, who I'm attempting to do something about him. I'm going to try assassinating. There's only a 2% chance of actually working, but there's a 50% chance of wounding, which is what I was going for. That failed, so I've just thrown away half of my income for this turn doing that. I was considering trying to use my spy Ifianasa to do something similar, but I realized that I have no money at all. I really can't afford to be doing agent wars. Instead, I'm going to take a defensive tactic, embedding Ifianasa in Eusebios' forces to reduce the chance of him being sabotaged again, so maybe next turn we can resolve the situation. Moving into the next turn, the Athenians declare war on me, seemingly out of nowhere. I have no idea what I did to them to warrant this reaction. It says they're neutral towards me, even slightly positive in terms of relations. But we're at war with them now. Whether that will have any consequences, I don't know. It does mean I'll have to be watching the seas for a possible naval invasion if they do want to come and show up and have at us. Some good news though, we've wounded an enemy agent, so my plan of putting Ifianasa in Eusebios' forces worked immediately. We got rid of the agent. Now we have full movement points, meaning we have the opportunity to try and lift the siege of Massalia. Excellent news. I'm still a bit worried because you can see the Pictones force has tons of those spearmen who I don't really like, so we need to fight the battle in such a way that they don't get the chance to bombard us with those spears. The Raeti force is mostly those phalanx Gallic warriors who fight like hoplites and are relatively difficult to kill but aren't particularly powerful either, so a nice holding force similar to the hoplites in our own line. I wondered whether I could sabotage the Pictones army in any way to stop them from getting involved in the battle and just take out the Raeti for now, but it was very unlikely to work and expensive of course, so I didn't bother with that in the end. We're going to have a straight fight. I'll attack the Raeti forces, Gelon and the city garrison will get involved, and in fact the balance bar is really far in our favour as you can see to begin with. It is going to re-evaluate that decision once we get in there. The enemy do actually have an advantage, but it won't be realised until we're on the field. So it's time to see if we can destroy both of these armies at once, lifting the siege on Massalia, and of course meaning we've actually gotten rid of all the short-term threats to Massalia itself if we can defeat both stacks. Let's have a go. Your arrogant wars have stained the reputation of all of the world's Hellenic states, most noticeably our own. We were asked why the people of Massalia are so brazen, why we aren't keeping them under control and using our power as the foremost of the Greeks to bring peace to the former scions of Hellas. Well, the truth, as you know, is that you Massalians have dug your own grave, and now to stop ourselves being pushed in with you, well, we shall be the ones doing the pushing. The world shall see that reckless merchants and fluke-prone generals cannot rise so far above their station, and that Athens will have no tolerance for such dangerous behaviour. So the battle begins. The majority of the battlefield is an open plain. We've deployed facing off against each other. I've deployed relatively near to the edge of the map so I can bring in the reinforcements from the city garrison and Gelon's cavalry units. You can see my immediate deployment is to take up a long position along the south of the map, occupying these open plains, ignoring the hill to my side for now. The enemy have the defensive advantage in this battle and they're going to use it. They are just setting up right in the middle of the map, a nice formation with some strange offshoots like this phalanx on the far left. Their main line is a combination of those phalanx units and these swordsmen. I'm not too worried about. They also have these phalanxes in reserve, strangely far away from their main line as well. They've got a few barricades defending their centre, and of course they have the Pictones coming in to reinforce. They're going to set up on the right hand side of the Raeti army, forming an extension to the line essentially. So I'm going to be doing the same thing, putting city garrison on my right hand side to extend my line around their flank. But shortly after the battle started, as I was just setting up my formation, the entire enemy army suddenly started moving. It seemed that as the Pictones linked up with the Raeti, they decided to go over to the hill that I had abandoned. I could have deployed on this hill, of course, but being the attacker, decided not to. So they're going to rush over to that hill and decide to occupy it whilst I'm still setting up on the plains. I am a little bit closer than they are, so I could race onto the hill before they got there. But there's some advantage at the moment to letting them just rush over there, because as you can see, the units aren't all moving at the same speed, especially the Raeti ones, which are stuck in phalanx formation, like this group at the back here, and it's basically the smaller units you see, which are really bunched together in amongst all the enemy's other units. They are going to be left behind as the rest of their formation rushes towards the hill. So what I'm going to do is just move up on these units and get really close. You can see a little bit later, the enemy have started occupying the hill with their vanguard units. I did have my cavalry up there for a brief time, but I'm moving them off as the enemy's position there becomes stronger and stronger. So as these units start setting up on top of the hill, you can see that way behind them there's a huge column of guys who've just about started their ramp up the hill, and even more guys who are way behind. These are the phalanx guys I mentioned, and my army is about to move up to flank them basically. We're going to set up right next to all of their trailing units and allow us to just take them out without worrying about the rest of their army, which is key because these are the best units in the enemy's army essentially. We can just take them out now that they're completely isolated, which will start tipping the balance back in our favour. What I'm doing is deploying archers in front of my army. The archers will be able to fire relatively close range into these phalanxes, hitting them in the flanks, which are particularly weak against missile attack. At first, it won't do all that much damage because the first few volleys are just going to reduce the health of the regiment and reduce the health of the men within the regiment, I should say. But once the health is all relatively low, we'll start getting one-shot kills. So later volleys will probably kill sort of tens of them at a time, but the first couple only kill one or two. Here you are a tiny bit later, you can see that happening. The pile of bodies being left behind by these regiments as they get hit by the arrows is getting bigger and bigger with every volley. Now I decided to start moving up my infantry to just outflank these units. They were starting to walk away, so I wanted to pin them down so I can hit them with even more arrows and take them out. The majority of the enemy's army is now on that hill, you can see, so I'm setting up a screening force to stop them coming back. The Raeti portion of the force decided to turn around and start coming back down, which is ideal. I guess they were distracted by the fact that we've started attacking some of their best units. They've come back to form up on the plains, but critically, the Pictones have not. They are continuing to march up the hill. It appears there's a division of command here, which means the enemy's army is being split in half. Our army is about the same size as theirs numerically, so our 7,000 or so troops will face just 3,500 of the enemies here on the open plain, whilst the Pictones go and sit on the hill. So this is an ideal strategic scenario, and I'm going to start exploiting it by just trying to outflank these groups of enemies as much as I can. You can see they're still under heavy missile fire. They've already taken significant losses. I believe one unit has shattered already at this point from missile fire. The enemy looked like they were going to come and engage my line, but they're moving in very slowly, and all the while arrows are raining down. You see their regiment is being decimated by these arrows, and they decide to just get out of there. They're not going to take any more of this deadly arrow fire. So we're killing their best units, as you can see, which is ideal, plus we're getting excellent flanking positions on the enemy. I'm starting to fold around the rest of their army, which has come back to support their hoplites. A lot of them have just engaged with my screening force, which includes those pike phalanx who are still facing the wrong way. It seems they just have a perennial bug. They can't actually face the guys they're trying to fight. Later on I'll sort them out though. So they're engaging with all these medium swordsmen. They have left a little gap in the line here where they're hitting with their skirmishers, which can be more successful. Those medium swordsmen aren't actually very good, so even though this screening force is just a few light Gallic levies, they will actually be able to hold them. I'm moving up some of these city hoplites to come and help them out though, just to make sure we definitely hold off the enemy here. I was expecting the Pictones to charge down and attack this part of the line as well. I was planning to hold the entire Pictones army on the edge on my left flank and then move my right flank around behind them. But because the Pictones are just sitting on the hill, I don't have to do that. I can just move my right flank to destroy the Raeti army first. There's some of those units that were being engaged by the archers near the beginning are now almost dead. We've got them pretty much surrounded with infantry as well. They don't really mind being engaged by the infantry, but another volley of arrows takes out the remaining quarter of their unit and they decide to get out of there. So very rapidly, this part of their battle line is breaking, giving us even more opportunities to move right around the back. You can see we've almost completely outflanked the enemy, in some cases with heavy hoplite units, so we're going to have some pretty decent guys coming in from behind to start engaging the enemy. I'm also outflanking them with cavalry, plus on the left flank the screening force has actually defeated those enemy swordsmen who came to fight them. Those Gallic levies did extremely well, much better than I expected they would, meaning now we have the chance to move the left flank around to outflank their centre as well. You can see the centre is consisting mainly of more swordsmen and various groups of their hoplite phalanxes, but still nothing really to worry about because we have such a huge numerical advantage and the enemy's killing rate is so low that we have plenty of time to outflank them and start reducing their morale, hopefully getting them off the field without having to kill all of them, because it's actually going to take a very long time to kill these guys. The defensive stats are so high. We did even have a breach in the line in the centre, but the enemy weren't exploiting it, so they weren't really trying, to be honest. The Pictones too aren't trying at all. They just sit on top of their hill, watching as the fight goes on the plains below, as we gradually outflank their allies. You can see cavalry marauding around, destroying all of the Raeti's missile troops. We have the enemy very much surrounded at this point, and the Pictones still haven't deployed. The enemy's left flank is pretty much gone, or our left flank, sorry, has won over the enemy's right flank. The enemy is trying to retreat but are being stuck because they're already surrounded and are thus being killed. We've still got a massive gap in the centre of our line. The enemy isn't exploiting it whatsoever, and I am going to come and hit them in the rear whilst they just stand there. Very weirdly, these hoplites just kind of rotate on the spot when I tell them to change their direction. They don't actually have any animation for turning around. I bet Michael Jackson wishes he could do that. It's very weird, but eventually once they're facing the right direction, they charge in a weird wedge formation, hitting the back of an enemy phalanx, so that will reduce their morale. Very good news. You can see we've pretty much formed a circle of units around all of the enemy's best troops. So the plan now is to try and get as many rear attack bonuses as we can and defeat said troops. The problem is, because they formed a circle, in some ways they're actually protecting their own rear, so it's becoming moderately difficult. Plus, at this point, the Pictones army decides they are going to come and engage in this battle. Suddenly there's a big time pressure, because my formation being in a circle is very vulnerable to being outflanked itself. So once the Pictones charge down the hill towards me, I need to have resolved the situation with the Raeti and have formed up some sort of linear formation to actually receive the enemy's charge. So I need to rout these guys as quickly as I can and really focus on just charging in and demoralizing them. The key was to break through this circle the enemy has set up, and it was Eusebios himself who eventually did that, breaking through one side and managing to attack all of the enemy's units inside the circle in the rear simultaneously. This was devastating their morale, including their general, who started fleeing and having many of his men killed. This resulted in a chain rout for some of the enemy's other units. A couple of them stayed behind, just a few of the hoplite units. They're going to keep fighting, even though they are pretty much outflanked very heavily, especially these guys being attacked in the flank and the rear. But most of them are going now, meaning I'm freeing up the majority of my units to start preparing a defense against the Pictones, who are still gradually moving down the hill towards me on the right, almost moving in slow motion it seems. It took a very long time to arrive. I guess it's because they were so tired from charging up the hill that charging down they weren't charging very quickly at all, which is excellent for me. So we finish off a couple of the Raeti units. We're going to leave a couple of them fighting behind our lines, just contain them, quarantine them with a few of our own hoplite phalanxes, whilst the rest of the guys form up to receive the Pictones charge. Now it's critical that I don't receive them with my heavy units, because they may just bombard me with javelins. So the plan was to move lots of light units around the flanks as distractions and possibly set up an attempt to attack the enemy in the rear, once they deploy against my line. plus put all of my weaker units, like the Gallic levies, in front of the defensive line I'm forming up. So these will be the first guys the enemy try to engage. So if they decide to just stand there and throw javelins, the initial couple of volleys will be soaked up by those less important units, leaving my hoplites a chance to move forward and lock the enemy into melee. So here they come, pick up their first units, the Gallic mercenary band and a few of those deadly spearmen leading the charge. Luckily they decide not to bombard me with javelins and actually charge right in. I'm going to counter-charge my levies to make sure we lock them down. I want to get the enemy into melee as soon as possible, obviously, so they don't have a chance to use their javelins. So although I was setting up a defensive line to receive them, along most of the line I'm just going to charge out, get as close to the enemy as I can, even though I'm charging slightly uphill, just to force them to get into melee. The enemy were skirmishing with my skirmishers, but by this point most of my skirmishers are actually out of ammunition. So in many ways they're just a distraction. I'd rather my useless skirmishers at this point were being hit by the enemy's missiles than my actual heavy troops who are still needed. This regiment here is taking a fair few javelins as it charges in. It's in a really dangerous situation because there are loads of enemy units behind the one it's engaging, so they could use the classic javelin tactic. But incredibly luckily for me, all of these reserve units decide to just charge into the fight, throwing their full weight against my line and not throwing their javelins, which is absolutely critical. And of course I now have numerical advantage, so every time they put more men onto the line, I can do the same thing, just charge more men to the back of my line, making sure that the battle line is always at equal strength on both sides. There's no chance for the enemy to break through. The battle line is getting very messy already as I'm attempting to outflank them where I can. All of these cavalry have charged right around the back of the enemy's formation, dodging the enemy's heavy cavalry and now coming in to attack the enemy's light forces who have been abandoned by their melee comrades. These guys aren't going to last long at all against these cavalry being led by Gelon, I believe, smashing through those slingers. They'll be out of the battle very soon. Here I'm chasing some enemy slingers with a hoplite unit, which is very bad news, but luckily I do notice that's happening and pull them back in shortly. On the other side of the battle, the enemy attacked with cavalry. I tried to counter with my own cavalry. The enemy were actually defeating my cavalry, but the situation was saved when I rushed some mob in to further engage the enemy's cavalry. The morale shock managed to get them to leave, even though they were winning the fight they were fighting. So my cavalry was saved by the mob, luckily for them. The enemy's lesser units are now being very much driven off the field by my medium and heavy cavalry. The enemy's heavy cavalry, though, is actually doing something very useful. They've charged onto my right flank and have just held back all of the guys I was going to use to fold around the back of the enemy's army. So they're doing the rest of their men a good favour by locking my guys in position. Plus, because most of my guys were swordsmen, those heavy cavalry are actually killing loads of them. I believe I lost half a regiment of my leading swords here fighting with these cavalry. So you can see I've moved up those javelins to try and pick off some of them, and then I'm going to push these hoplites who are coming in as reinforcements to go in and take out those enemy cavalry, hopefully defeating their general. That would be very useful. Now you can see the battle line is formed into two smiley faces here, which are kind of separate from each other. There's a separate offshoot here which isn't quite linked, and then there's Eusebios sitting in the middle, just generally attempting to inspire the troops and acting as a reserve in case the two smile shapes buckle in the middle. I've got plenty of guys coming around to attack in the rear, although most of those guys have very low stats. It's mostly archers with no ammunition and mob, but still their ability to inflict morale shocks is just the same. The enemy's line is looking very thick in this particular part of the battle, but there's not much they can do to break through because my hoplite phalanx is unmovable. I moved up my pike phalanx to plug the gap between the two slightly separate parts of the line, and this time they actually did their job correctly. They keep the enemy at bay, stopping the enemy from coming through this gap and attacking the flanks on either side of this regiment of the guys who are actually holding the other enemy regiments in position. Here on the extreme left, we are starting to fold around and get some nice rear attacks on these enemy units, although they're not routing just yet. I'm coming in from the rear as well with even more guys, though some of them are only mob, of course. The enemy are somewhat willing to engage from the rear. They're not too worried at this point, but gradually my guys are going to be defeating them, reducing their numbers, and soon they'll go below the threshold where they're not going to fight on all sides. So a little bit later, I've moved even more forces around. The enemy is still fighting on, neither side really inflicting casualties on each other in the main line, since both sides are just formed up with spear walls and aren't really doing very much, but we have them completely strategically surrounded at this point, which is not going to be doing anything good for their morale. And finally, I just do a massive charge with all of my light forces, archers, mob, and any actual hoplites I can get together into the back of the main enemy blob, and it causes an enormous chain rout. 5 regiments right here instantly rout, freeing up the entire right flank of my main line. They're going to flee right through my own forces, of course, and get many of themselves killed. On the left flank, something similar starts to happen. A few enemies start to rout, The remaining guys are going to be very rapidly surrounded and outnumbered. There's not much they can do to win in this situation. The couple of guys fighting on in the centre are doing okay, including the Gallic Mercenary Band, who are particularly strong against the types of units I'm deploying here. But the sheer numerical advantage and the fact we have them totally surrounded, their general is gone, it's not going to allow them to last much longer. Their morale breaks, a chain rout of all of the remaining enemies occurs. This is a victory for Eusebios and his men. The battle is completely one-sided in many ways. We lost almost nobody fighting with these forces because they split their men up so much. Our army looks very healthy there, whereas the enemy army running off the field is very disparate. Just a few men surviving from the enemy's forces, trying to rush up the hill. I'm not even bothering to chase them down because I'm so unworried about the number of enemy troops left over. To commemorate this situation, I decided to take a tourist picture of this particularly scenic moment. So this is a heroic victory for Eusebios and Masalia's forces. Most of our forces left intact, the enemy are gone. This means there's a chance for us to counterattack and possibly take some revenge. We'll see the true consequences of this battle on the next episode of Massalia Tales. The Pictones, having previously shunned the help of the now lost Confederation army, turned to Raeti to help them attack the city. The Raeti were eager to earn the spoils of fighting in the vanguard and rushed into battle as the slow-moving Massalian army rumbled towards them. But the Pictones, knowing the power of the legions of brave Greek spearmen, preferred a defensive strategy. Thus, the divided command left the Raeti fighting while the Pictones settled themselves on a nearby hill. But seeing their supposed allies being wiped out, they gave up what advantage they had in height to commit to one massive charge. Almost none survived.